All right, hello. My name is Iain Lapointe, and welcome to my webinar on growing a track and field program. I'll just give you a quick outline of what this is going to look like today. We're going to start with just a brief introduction about myself. We're going to talk about building on the past, a bit about school track and club track partnership, and then the majority of this the presentation will be on creating culture, recruiting and retaining coaches, recruiting and retaining athletes, and then we'll finish off with just a couple other factors to consider. So, brief introduction. As I said, my name is Iain Lapointe. I'm a high school mathematics teacher at CEC here in Truro. I've been the head coach of the CEC track and field team for 7 years, and I've been coaching javelin with CEC for 14 years. I'm also a javelin coach with the local club here in Truro, the Truro Lions, and I've been doing that for 10 years. I'm a club coach certified coach, and I also recently completed my performance coach. So I'm a performance coach in training at the moment. I've got 25 years of coaching in various sports. I've coached baseball since I was a teenager, and I've coached right up from minor baseball all the way up to senior baseball, which I played as well, and right up to the university level. But the majority of my coaching in the recent time, I guess, has been with track and field. So I've been doing that for about 17 years. So I just want to talk, before we get into kind of the meat and potatoes of the session, I want to talk a bit about building on the past. I'll give it a little bit of credit where I see it's probably appropriate to do so. First of all, CEC and CEC sports in general and track and field in particular have quite a history. So just want to kind of mention a couple names. Bob Gibbs and Bob Peers, who started the CEC track and field team back in the early 70s, and then built upon later by Mike McKay, Steve Malik, and Paul Millman were all kind of instrumental in promoting track and field at CEC. And as well on the club side of things, I was an athlete back in the 90s, in the early 90s in Truro, with the Legion Legends, and we had a large crew back then, and that was run by the Millmans, Paul Millman and Joyce Millman, and Steve Malik. And then our current kind of iteration of the track and field club here in Truro, now the Truro Lions, was started by Paul Millman and John Nolan. So just kind of for coaches to recognize as you know, as you take over a head coach kind of position, or if you're even just an event coach, just be aware of what's come before you. And you know, a lot of cases, a lot of communities have some sort of you know, past clubs that it's, you know, it's good to be aware of. And the thing I will mention though is that if those aren't suited to kind of the way you coach or your style, you can always change the culture. And as I said, we're going to be talking about culture quite a bit and how you create culture. All right. So a little bit about school track and club track partnership. As I said, I'm both the CEC track and field coach as well as with the Truro Lions. So I think it's really, really important that that the programs kind of work together. The seasons are seamless in so much as that, you know, the school track season runs from March until June, but the club track runs you know, in the winter time with the indoor season, you know, late fall and throughout the winter, January, February, March, and then the club track picks up again after the school track season ends. So it's really important that the club coaches and the school track coaches are at least aware of each other. A lot of those athletes will be moving back and forth between the two, and it's important that that there is some sort of recognition of that, and it helps a lot. Makes a big difference when those coaches can work together, as well as for recruiting purposes. Makes it a lot easier for me to have access to, you know, a large pool of students at CEC if I'm trying to get them out for school track, and that I could also get them out for summer track as well, or for indoor track in the winter. And finally, the same thing as far as coaches. We have many of our school coaches at CEC are also club coaches with the Truro Lions. So you know, when the two can work together, and that hasn't always been the way it is in Truro with in a lot of places with the school track and club track working together. But if they can, I think that's very, very important. And I think probably it's appropriate at this time just to give a mention to our the leader of our Truro Lions is Sherry Alexander, and she's done an absolutely fantastic job, in my opinion, of growing the Truro Lions from what it was just a throws club initially to a successful all-around track and field club. And so she's doing kind of exactly what I think is the appropriate thing to do to grow a club. And just want to mention that I've coached, had the pleasure of coaching both of her children up through CEC and teaching them as well. Yeah, she's done an excellent job with the Truro Lions. Okay, so let's talk a bit about team culture. So the first thing I say is it's really important for a coach, and not just a head coach, but any coach, to really have a good idea of what is the goal of your program and what do you define as a successful program. I think those are things that you need to, kind of start off initially and have an idea about those. And I guess that can grow over time, but to have an idea of where you're trying to take the program, what you're trying to do, and here's just a couple ideas of things that you can, I guess, think about for your program. First one is maybe your goal is to win team banners, either on the club level provincially or just in school track. Same thing. Maybe you're trying to produce high performance athletes, or maybe your goal is just to increase participation and to promote lifelong participation and healthy living. These are all really good examples of things, and they're not mutually exclusive. These are things that can work together, but you should have an idea of what you're trying to do with your program. In my opinion, culture starts with the head coach and filters down. So the head coach really has to have an idea of what direction they're trying to take the program. And that's really important that the head coach can kind of start that, initiate that, and lead through there. It's not the athletes, and this is an issue that I've kind of come across when I took over the CEC track and field team, and even within club track in the past. Sometimes it's the athletes who are trying to lead the direction of the team. I think it's important that the head coach, the managers, the event coaches are the ones that define the culture, and then the athletes, we're trying to get them to buy into it, and not the other way around. So on that regard, it's really important, again, in my opinion, that the coaches set clear expectations and the athletes are aware of those expectations, and then the coaches follow through with those expectations. I start every season at CEC with a coaches meeting, and that usually happens in January or February, where we talk about our goals for the season. We talk about anything new. We just kind of hash that all out very early on. We don't wait until the season's underway before we do that. We want to start that early enough that all the coaches are aware of what my expectations are, and we work together as a collaborative team to try to figure out which direction we're heading for in the season, things we can build upon from last year, things that we want to change. We also have very early on in our season a parent and athlete meeting, and I call this mandatory. So with our CEC team, we're looking at a very large group, usually over 100 athletes, and I call this a mandatory meeting. And this is an opportunity where we get all of the athletes and the parents together in one room, together with the coaches, and I spend about an hour talking about the expectations of being on a team and what it's like to be on a varsity team in high school. Because a lot of these athletes aren't necessarily athletes who would play other varsity sports, but I think it's important to kind of define those expectations early on in the season. So just a couple of things that help define the team culture. And these are things that I've used and I use continuously. And just be aware that these aren't things that I just all of a sudden I started initially. These are things that kind of I built upon over the year. I had an idea this year that I wanted to try, and I think that worked well, so I continue with it the next year. But some very important ones to begin with. First of all, accountability. What it means to play a sport and to attend practice. So practice attendance is very, very important. Again, I've run across this sometimes in high school track, particularly. People think it's different than maybe a hockey team or a baseball team or a football team, where, if I don't show up here and there, it's not going to make a big deal. It's not like I'm, on a baseball team or a football team where you're one of 9 or 12 players that are on the field or on the court where your attendance is mandatory. But I really think it's important that athletes know what your expectations are, and maybe you don't expect them to be at every single practice. So it's important that they're aware of that. And the same thing with effort. What kind of effort is required for these athletes to play on the team? And that's something that, again, is built upon from years past, that athletes that are returning can really help with that. At CEC, we have a set of what's called Cougar policies that deal with everything from attendance and effort to right up to consequences for smoking and drinking in season. Social media is a big one that we define early on in the season, and those are a set of policies that are defined at our school, but also on the team level as well, that we go over at that parent-athlete meeting, and every student signs it, and they are aware of what our expectations are and what the accountability is to be on the team. As far as the expectations, these are things that sometimes, and I'm guilty of this in the past too, we teach it maybe at the start of the year, and students need to be reminded. We can't expect, a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old to be taught something at the start of the year and not be reminded of it, and expect them to act and behave accordingly or perfectly. So really, really important that we remind students and teach them and help them understand what we're trying to do. So one thing I do before each of the track and field meets for our high school team is that we have a meeting before each meet, and we talk about what is acceptable behavior at the competition and what the expectations are. And we do the same thing, I guess, at the start of the year for practices and what's acceptable behavior for, attending on time. If you're not going to be attending, what should you do? When is it appropriate to miss a practice for schoolwork versus, for a job, that type of thing. Really, really important. And, when we have our meeting before our districts and our regionals for our track team, we talk about things like the behavior and, staying at the track the whole time and cheering on your teammates. One of the big things that I was kind of always taught as an athlete growing up is leave the space better than you found it. So, when you get to the track and you're trying to clean things up, when you leave it, no one on my team gets on the bus until our place is spotless wherever we are. And that's something that I've built kind of into the athletes, and they know that now. And I've hauled 70 kids off a bus and say, go pick that area up until it's spotless. And those things are important, and it's just small things, but it's all part of the larger team culture. And routines are really important within team culture. What does your warm-up look like? What does your practice warm-up look like? What does your competition warm-up look like? Are you expected to warm up on your own, or are you supposed to warm up with your event group, or maybe you warm up with your entire team? These are things that I think I know in the high school level, Amherst has always done a really good job. It's kind of neat at their regionals and districts. They'll show up, and their whole team, their high school team, will get out in the field and go through a little warm up together, and that's always. I always thought that was kind of neat. So just as part of that overall team culture, routines are very, very important. All right, as far as things that happen away from the track, I think this is also really important that help define our team culture. We do a lot of kind of team activities that aren't specifically track and field related. Here's just a few of them. Things like team meals. We get varying participation from year to year and from event to event, but team meals, just any sort of team events. We've done all kinds of things with the track team, and some are, as I said, better attended than others. We go bowling, skating, swimming. The skating one, I'm a little worried about that. Some people aren't good skaters who don't want to injure anybody, but we had a lot of fun. We've done things like rock climbing, laser tag, movie nights, and there's kind of cheap ways to do all of these things too. So these are the type of things that, when you've got different event groups, the throwers don't often get to be in the same place necessarily as the distance runners or the high jumpers. So I think it's really important when you've got, a group of athletes and teenagers, that they get a chance to interact with each other and kind of build some camaraderie before they get to the competition. It's really important, again, in my opinion, that they are able to to hang out in a non-athletic setting, and that really does build the team culture. Another thing that I've really kind of worked on over the years is creating a team identity. I think I'm really lucky with CEC that we've got that bright orange color. We're kind of known for that. So with team gear, the different things that we get every year, I'm wearing my Cougars hoodie. That I'm very proud to wear, to put on my orange, but everything from your uniforms to your t-shirts. We give out t-shirts as part of our team fees every single year, so that they get a t-shirt with a different saying on it from year to year. Hoodies, jackets, tracksuits, backpacks. So every year I try to do something a little bit different, or I've got kind of the staples or the standbys, like these hoodies we've been giving out, or not giving out, but making available For the last 3 or 4 years there, students really like them, athletes really like them. But we try something new every year. Last year I got a bunch of tattoos made up that students could wear that I gave them out at our districts and regionals, and just anything to kind of create that identity for the team and to have that team aspect. And I guess maybe this is an appropriate kind of time in the presentation to mention that I've always approached our track and field, and this was not directly from my thinking. This was there before I even got there when I was an athlete back at CEC. Track and field, it's an individual sport when you step on the track, but we approach it as a team sport. We really push that aspect. And in the school track, our goal is to win provincial banners, and you can only do that when you've got multiple athletes or many athletes competing, at the provincial level, and at regionals at the regional level. So we really push the team aspect. So I think it's very important for, if that's the right route that you're going to go, to create that team identity. And it's pretty awesome when we show up at our district meet and our regional meet and provincials with multiple buses, and we pour off the track, and we've got this sea of orange. Everybody knows when CEC shows up at the track, and it's partly because of the gear we're wearing. Okay, and there's lots of kind of cheaper options that we give athletes, and we'll talk a bit about budgeting a little bit later on. But I think it's important that the students feel part of something bigger than themselves, and it makes a lot of athletes who may be nervous and tentative to compete. When you're standing on the 100-meter line, you're all by yourself, right? Or when you're stepping up to throw the javelin, you're by yourself. But if you've got a lot of people cheering you on, and you've got that orange on that other people, and you can see that around, it makes you feel part of something bigger than what you are. Another thing that I really try to do is celebrate successes. I guess some of the things that we say are successful. So when we show up to a meet, or we talk about this before, we kind of define 3 different ways that you can be successful at a meet. One is getting a personal best. Obviously in track and field, kind of everybody shoots for that. If you do better in an event or at a meet than you've ever done in your life, that's obviously success, right? Another thing is if you place top 3, right? If you're in a medal position, that is being successful. And to kind of broaden that out a little bit, in the school track level anyway, at provincials, the top 8 get points. So I mean, if you end up in top 8s, if you score points towards your team banner, that's success. Okay, so personal best, getting points for placing top 3, and then the third one we kind of say is if you do better than your seeding when going into an event. If you're seeded 6th and you come 5th, that's a win. Okay, so that's successful. So really trying to push that to athletes and we also have to make them understand that you're not always going to do any of those 3 things, but those are all wins, kind of in my book. One thing I started a couple years ago was personal best ribbons. So I just went to one of our local shops in town and was able to have some ribbons made up that say personal best with our CEC logo on them, and I give them to our event coaches. So after each of our 3 school meets, our districts, regionals, and provincials, we give out personal best ribbons, and I even put a little card on the back, stapled a little card that the coaches fill in that says the name, it says the event, what meet it was at, what event they got the personal best in, as well as and what that was. And it's a really nice keepsake, and students love these. It was a big hit, and they're not that expensive. We bought, I think I bought about 400 of these because I knew I was going to use them from year to year. But personal best ribbons is a great way. So what I do is at the practice after the meet, I'll have the ribbons all made up, and we'll do a little presentation. So even that kid who didn't do that well at the meet, or what they think they didn't do that well, if they got a personal best and they get recognized for it, that's really big. And it's a great part of being part of that team and being recognized. Another thing that I've been doing, since right from the get-go when I took over the team, was on social media. And I'm sure you're all aware of how much time students spend on social media, whether it's the kind of the old standbys of Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat. I started a Twitter account 7 or 8 years ago with CEC Track, and I highlight athletes throughout the season. Besides using it as a form of communication with the athletes, which I do, and I ask them to join and to follow at CEC Track. But we also, especially starting at our meets, I'm constantly taking pictures. I'm putting them up there. I'm putting results on there, which is much easier now with the online live results that we're getting. I can just take screenshots of them. So I encourage you, if you get a chance, go back and take a look on Twitter at CEC Track, and you can scroll back and look through all 7 years. And I've got a lot of former athletes who continue to follow our track team, as well as parents as well, because they like to see what's happening. And it's a really, really good way to kind of connect with the athletes and to recognize them. And they love it. They absolutely love it. We're getting all kinds of retweets and likes, and they want to show their friends and say, look, this is what I did on the weekend. Look, here's me in my uniform. Here's a picture. And I came third at regionals, or whatever the case may be. So that's very important for athletes. My next topic is just a little bit about giving back to the program. I'm talking again about CEC Track and Field. This has always been an expectation. For me, growing up as an athlete competing at CEC, it was expected that at some point I would give back. And there's lots of different ways that students can give back to a program. So I'll just kind of go through some of them. One of them is just volunteering to minor official, to be a minor official at meets. CEC always hosts at least one of the meets our districts every year. And as many of you know, it takes a lot of people to run a meet. But the expectation is, and we talk about this, we don't just, expect people to volunteer. We talk about the fact that we expect pretty much every one of our athletes at some point during the meet is going to be either pulling a tape, is going to be on the timer, and no one gets away without doing this. And I think that's very, very important, that once you establish that culture and say, look, this is what you're going to be doing, students will buy into it, and they like it. And then kind of to that regard is that from year to year, as we have graduating athletes who are gone away to college or university, and the track season's kind of in our late spring, we have students that come back and ask us and approach me and say, hey, can I come and help out at the meet? I love to do that. And it's pretty awesome when you've got people offering to help. And sometimes it's pretty hard to get volunteers, but when kids are offering to help, that's makes all of our lives a little bit easier. We also expect our more experienced athletes to help the younger athletes. We do nominate, captains on our team. We have a male captain and a female captain on the track, and a male and a female captain with the field events as well. And they oversee some of this type of thing, but the expectation is that the athletes that have been around for a little while, maybe he do summer track or do club track in the summer or the winter, that they're helping the newer athletes and really kind of showing them the ropes. And that is an expectation on our team. With the grassroots programs, things like the run, jump, throw, wheel, I know that the Truro Lions and Sherry do a great job of this, getting athletes to come out and volunteer their time with the younger kids. And as a younger athlete, as an 8 or a 9-year-old, my kids are 8 and 10 right now, for them to see CEC athletes or Truro Lions athletes to come out and help them out, it's exciting. They think of those athletes as older kids, as big kids, or even as adults. So to have them around the track is awesome for them to see. Just kind of a comment, and this is on CEC track and CEC sports in general. 9 of our current 12 coaches at CEC competed in track and field at CEC. So you talk about giving back. So most of our coaches were CEC athletes. Only a few of them are actually CEC teachers. At least half of our coaches, more than half of our coaches, I guess, are community coaches. But they've come back and it's just because that was instilled in them and me as well as an athlete, that you need to give back to the program when you're not competing anymore. And then I'll mention that 2 of the other 3 that are currently with our team were athletes at CEC, not specifically track and field, but they've come back to coach and they've ended up with the track and field team. This is kind of a fairly new thing that I didn't really start, it just kind of happened. In track and field, you don't have a lot of gear. That's fairly well known, but you need to have spikes, is something that pretty much every athlete, unless you're a thrower, is going to have, and they're kind of tough to come by sometimes. So what's been happening, and this kind of started and now I've fostered it, is that when an athlete graduates, or after their grade 12 year, if they're not going on to compete at university, or they're pretty much, if they're done, I just put a tweet out there, put a notice out there to say any athletes who would like to donate their spikes back to the program, just drop them off at the school. And I get 10, 15 pairs every year of people that say, look, I'm not going to wear these spikes. They come back to me. And then we sell them for a very small fee, $5 or $10 to some athletes that don't have them, or give them away to some athletes that maybe can't afford to buy them. And it's a great way to kind of keep people involved with the program and also make it cheaper for some other people. So, and that just happened one day. I think, a couple athletes dropped by and had a bag of spikes that they wanted to give me, and hey, I'll take those for sure, and I can find a home for them. It's a kind of a neat thing that just kind of came out of nowhere. All right, let's talk a bit about recruiting and retaining coaches. As I said, I'm the head coach, but I started out as an event coach, and then I took over the team when our current head coach stepped down. So just a couple notes from this regard. First of all, I think it's really important that the head coach sets out a vision and makes sure that potential coaches fit with the head coach's vision of the program. Everybody needs to be on the same page. The head coach gets to define the culture of the team, and any coach who comes on board needs to be part of that. And that's why it's important to kind of have that meeting at the start of the year to get everybody on the same page, as I'm mentioning here. So set out those expectations for coaches, answer any questions, make sure everybody's on board, and then kind of make sure that they're following through. The head coach always has the right to decide if a volunteer coach fits with the culture of the program. I know it sounds weird to be turning away coaches, but sometimes it has to happen. If it's not working, no one wants to be in a situation where they're butting heads with somebody constantly. So I think it's important that the head coach kind of recognizes that. And that may lead to some tough conversations, and that's just goes with part of the program. But make sure that anybody who comes on as part of your team is aware of what you're trying to do, is aware of your vision, and fits. And that may be something that, like I said, that you may have to ask a volunteer to either change their ways or maybe they don't fit with the program. When I'm recruiting coaches, the first thing I try to do is look for some people that have experience in track and field. That's kind of my first step, and that seems kind of like a no-brainer, but some places you can look are masters athletes or former athletes, athletes that have gone through your program. There's a wealth of knowledge in the run clubs that don't necessarily compete in track and field per se. Maybe they're just running, maybe they're competing in, they're doing 5Ks and 10Ks and marathons, that type of thing, but there's lots of people that are kind of out there. You just kind of have to search them out. And that's the first place I look. The second thing I'll say is that anytime I have a volunteer come and say, look, I'm interested in coaching with the team, I give them a chance, right? And the more successful our program has been, I have people every year saying, do you have a spot for me? Can I help you out? And, sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, but it's pretty awesome to be able to say, look, we've got a staff of 12 or 13 people on our team, and I don't have to do that much work now. Initially, it was a lot of work to get those coaches out, but you've got to go looking first. I will mention that it's really important that these event coaches or assistant coaches try to put them in a place where they're comfortable coaching, if at all possible. And I've been guilty of this in the past. Someone comes and says, I'm interested in coaching. Can you help out, or can I help out? And I say, yep, absolutely. Thinking that, hey, maybe I'm missing an event coach right now in middle distance. So I'll ask them if they have any experience there, and they don't, but I'm trying to fill a void. Try to put them in a place where they're going to be comfortable, or else they're not going to stick around that long. And that may mean maybe sometimes having two coaches in the same event, and I'll cover that momentarily. But put them in a place that they're going to be comfortable, and that they're going to want to come back and continue to be part of your program from year to year. Once they're in those positions, once you have these coaches, really make sure that you understand that it's the head coach's responsibility to oversee them. So when I'm coaching with CEC, we usually throw javelin in the football field behind our school, and then we've got the tack rounds, our gravel track that's in a different location completely. I think it's really important that I show my face. After my practices, I often head down to the tack rounds just so the athletes can see me, go talk to the coaches, ask them how it's going, what do they need, how can I help them. It's really important, I think, for the volunteer coaches to know, the event coaches to know that they've got someone who can support them and who wants to help them out in every possible way. I've really been pushing coaching education in the last several years. There's all kinds of opportunities. Athletics Nova Scotia does a great job of providing opportunities for all event groups, so I encourage coaches to get the proper training, anything from the club coach to run, jump, throw, wheel, etc. And I offer to pay for it. I don't make coaches pay for anything, if at all possible, so we cover all of that for them. And again, I'll talk about how that works within the budget shortly. But if a coach comes to me and says, "Look, there's this seminar that I want to go to. There's this something I want to go to on the weekend that's coaching related," I'll absolutely bring me the receipt and I'll write you a check. So you're not going to have to pay for any of that. So if possible, encourage those coaches to get the proper training. I think that's a big part of being successful and coaches staying involved. So personally, one of my biggest kind of challenges and goals as the head coach, besides the track and field part of it, I make it a priority to keep my coaches happy, and I do that in lots of different ways. So we usually have a coaches dinner early on in the season, and this is different from the coaches meeting. So at the coaches dinner, sometimes we have a catered meal, or we all go out together, and I think it's again important for the coaches to interact in a non-track and field setting as well. So that's always a fun way to kind of start the season. Every year I get team gear that's specifically for coaches, whether, we've done everything from rain gear. We got a full set of rain gear one year, or backpacks or bags that are just for the coaches, or a tracksuit. Every year we get something that the coaches, and it kind of defines the coaches and have them stand out a little bit from what the athletes have. I try to do this on a regular basis, is really kind of give the coaches some praise and kind of pump them up a little bit too, whether that means on social media or talking to the athletes, or talking to when we have our parents meeting, and really kind of let the parents know that, and let the athletes know that these are volunteer coaches and they're taking their time away to be with the team. And it's nice to know that you're appreciated, right? Everybody does this for different reasons, but most of them are selfless reasons, but it's always nice to be told that you're doing a good job, and for people to recognize the time and effort that coaches put into things. I'm also constantly on the lookout for assistant coaches. It's my goal for every event coach that we have in our program to have a secondary coach, an assistant coach. I've been working with a former athlete of mine, Jessica Bartlett. I coached her right from the time she was probably in grade 8 all the way through till she competed at Canada Games, and she went through 4 Legions as medaled 3 times as a Legion athlete, and then she came back, and we've been coaching together. She's a teacher now, and we've been coaching together for about 7 or 8 years. And I think it's very important for every coach to have someone to bounce ideas off and to talk to, and if they can't make it one day, the other coach can make it. So, it's a little bit of pressure for a coach to have an event group all to their own. So when they've got a secondary person, it makes it a lot easier for them to kind of work through any issues, and someone to talk to. Former athletes make great assistant coaches. As I mentioned, Jessica works with me. I have athletes every year coming back after university or college in the summer and in the spring and saying, do we need any help? Can I help you out? And that's an awesome way for athletes to give back to the program, because they're already familiar with the culture of the team. They get it. They've gone through and they want to be part of something. And so that makes it easy. That's a nice transition. I will kind of caution, I try to, if at all possible, when we have former athletes come back to help out with the team, to try to have at least 3 years of age separation. So, if someone's in first year university, we may not turn them away necessarily from coaching. We may kind of push them to other avenues, I guess. But when you're first year university and there's kids on the team that you're supposedly coaching who are only a year younger than you, and they were on the team together the year before, that can be tricky. So the 3 year separation, we only have grades 10 through 12 at CEC. So, if I have an athlete who's 3rd or 4th year university, they won't have competed with or been on the same team with anybody that they're coaching. So that's, I think, if at all possible, that's important to do. So what I'll do if I have a student who comes back or an athlete who comes back, in university who are their first or their second year, they make great coaches in junior highs in the feeder programs or the developmental programs. So I'm always aware of what the junior highs need, and I will, reach out to the junior high coaches and say, look, I've got this 20-year-old who wants to coach track and field and wants to be around. Could you use a throws coach? And they absolutely love it. Both the junior high coaches as well as the athletes. So they're kind of a great way to get some continuity. And they can kind of promote that culture from your high school back to the junior high athletes. So it's kind of a big cycle. We're going to get those junior high athletes in a few years anyway. So if they can be coached by a former CEC athlete who understands what we're trying to do, all the better. I will point out recruiting is an ongoing process. Right? I'm constantly looking for coaches or at least aware of what our coaching situation is. I'm not waiting until March to ask coaches if they're coming back from year to year, and I never assume that they are. I always kind of have a backup plan, but I'll touch base with them in the fall potentially, and then again in January, and ask them what they need to looking forward to the season. Do they need any new gear, that type of thing? But I'm constantly kind of touching base and preparing for in case a coach leaves the program, right? If your sprints coach leaves and that's a big part of your program and you don't have a plan, like what are you going to do? And if you're not prepared to take over that part of the team, then it can leave you in the lurch. So I'm thinking, and it can be a stressor for the head coach, but what would happen if this coach left the program? Where would that put us, and how could we deal with that? And as well, if you are the head coach of your program, it's a good idea at any point in time to have a succession plan. What's going to happen to the program? As coaches, we put a lot of time and effort into our teams, and we want to make sure that if we had to step away for any reason, be it a health reason or a family reason, what's going to happen to the team? Who's going to take over? Do we have someone in the sidelines or the wings who's ready to to keep things going? All right, I'm going to talk a bit about recruiting and retaining athletes now. I kind of switch to the athletes. When I took over the head coach, my first goal, my goal was just to get more numbers. I think that that's the place to start. If you're looking at a basketball team or a baseball team that might only have 12 or 13 or 14 players on the team, it's fairly easy in most places to field a team. But with track, you can have a lot of athletes in your team. So initially, when I took over the team, my goal was to increase the numbers. I remember sitting at the athletic awards for CEC Athletic Awards my first year coaching and seeing all the athletes from team after team come up to the stage and thinking, geez, there's only 20% of the basketball team is doing track and only 30% of the football team. We should have 300 kids on our track team. And we have a lot. We don't have 300, but there are athletes out there, and you can go and get them. You can find them. You just have to know where to look. Another big thing that I really, really push for my team is that, or I guess don't push it, but I understand it. Not all the athletes are going to be stars, right? Yes, we want that kid who can, throw a 14-meter shot put, or that girl that can high jump 165 or 170. Yes, we want those on your team, but don't just go after those. Go after anybody who's willing to come out and train and work. I think that's really, really important that the athletes understand that they don't have to be a star. When I'm trying to get grade 10s to come out, and our school starts in grade 10, our high school does, not grade 9. So we're working with only 1 year of intermediate athletes. Kid tells me they've never done track before. I said, that's okay. That's all right. We'll teach you. We have the coaches. You don't have to be a star coming onto this team. Or an athlete says, I didn't make provincials in grade 9. I said, yeah, but you're in grade 10 now. You're still competing against grade 9s. It's okay to come out. I don't expect you to be, world class or even to make provincials necessarily. As long as the coaches recognizes that, then I think it's important that they kind of make sure that the athletes recognize that as well. And this kind of plays on to the idea of, why do teenagers play sports? What are they out there for? And I know there's been some studies out there, and I can't reference them right now, but I've definitely seen this before. The top reason is not to win, right? Teenagers they want to have fun, number one. They want to enjoy doing what they're doing, right? They're taking their time out of their day to come out. They want to have fun. They want to hang out with their friends. this is an interesting one, but you're dealing with high school age students. Track is one of the only sports that's co-ed, right? So for kids to come out and say, oh, there's both guys and girls that are sprinters, that are throwers, that are jumpers, that are runners, that's interesting. And sometimes that can be a selling point, say, it's not just a bunch of jocks or males, right? That has that other component to it as well. And athletes and teenagers in general, they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. A lot, not all, but a lot. They want to be part of a team, right? So winning isn't necessarily the number one thing. And as long as again, from my opinion, if that's the way that's the vision we're going to kind of shoot for with our team, it's important to recognize that. And that will help you with your recruiting process. So, as I said, first step is to get athletes out, to convince them to come out. This is a little bit harder for summer track, right? And I get that, especially if you're not a teacher. I do have access to, at CEC, we've got 1,350 students, so, and I teach a lot of them, so I can get kids out, or I have at least access to talk to them. And I'll try to, I've got all of, from the fall right up until March to kind of convince kids that track is something that they might want to be interested in. So the first step is to get them out. And that's an easy sell in a lot of cases. Track and field literally has an event for everyone. I say, kid, you want to come out for track? And they tell me that, oh, I'm not a runner, I'm not very fast. Yeah, that's okay. You know what? Maybe you can throw a shot put, or maybe you can jump. We can find a place for you. So, or the kid tells me they don't know what they want to do. That's okay. We will help you decide what's best for you. I'm very clear in my recruiting that you don't have to have any experience in order to do track and field. We will teach you, we will guide you, we will figure out where you fit in. You don't need to have ever competed before to come out for our team. Track, and this is something that you'll hear some people talk about. It's a fantastic off-season sport for there's very few, not especially, but there's very few athletes that I find who are in high school who are pure track athletes. Right? The people that come out, they're playing something else, whether it's volleyball or soccer or football or baseball. But get them to come out, go talk to those athletes. Oh, you play football? Perfect. You should be running track. If you're a volleyball player? Perfect. You should be jumping, right? Or a football lineman, you should be throwing, right? Or you're a soccer player, oh, you should be running middle distance or longer distance. Or whatever the case may be. It's a great off-season sport, and that's a selling point that I can really push onto students and athletes now and again. If you can get coaches from other sports on board, and this is a tough one, and I'm not going to get into this because it drives me nuts, but the single sport athletes who play one sport all year round. But if you've got other coaches who understand that students need to move, athletes need to move in high school from sport to sport, and you talk to those coaches and get them on board, they'll recruit for you. And we're great at this at CEC. The soccer coaches tell the kids when their season ends, make sure you do track, right? Or the football coaches, you guys should be doing track in order to get better for the next year. So talk to the other coaches, try to convince them your point of view, and tell them that you're going to send these athletes back to them the year after better than when they left, because they're getting stronger. We'll teach you how to run and jump and throw properly, and you're going to be better for it. Okay, so I'm just going to show you a little graph here of the numbers. I'm going to turn my camera off if I can do that possibly, so it's not in the way. So this is, since I've taken over the track and field team, this is our numbers in the different categories. And I will mention again that the intermediates, we only have them in grade 10. Now that is changing. I'm not sure some of you are aware, some of you are not. We are starting to get some grade 9s next year. But so if you look at the numbers when I had in my first year coaching, we had 68 athletes, which in most sports, in most teams across the province, that's a pretty good number. But like I said, I had that moment at my team awards where I said we should have way more than that. So my second year, first year was a learning experience. My second year, I really started recruiting hard, and you can see our numbers went up. And these are the numbers that actually of athletes that competed at the district event. They actually went and they competed. So, we had more than that initially on our team, but, we had 96 athletes. So our team grew just the next year, from just talking to kids and getting them out. And then you can see we've had this kind of, I wouldn't call exponential growth, but definitely constant growth from year to year. 2018 we had 121 athletes competed at districts, and our numbers were pretty high. So I've really been pushing the intermediate girls, intermediate boys to come out. Those grade 10s are always the unknown. I don't know what we're coming. That's where I guess I concentrate, because if I can get them in grade 10, for the most part they're going to stay in through grade 11 and grade 12. It's those senior boys that's always the tough one. There's some kids that I know are athletes that I go after in grade 10 and they tell me no, and that's fine. I'll ask them again in grade 11. But for some reason, maybe it's the fact that they're leaving high school. Every senior boy who's an athlete wants to come out and do track and field in their grade 12 year. So, we didn't get to compete this year in 2020, but these were my numbers when we left in March break. And I'm sure that 145 will actually be a bit lower, or would have been a bit lower had we had a season. But we had 57 senior boys who were ready to do track and field for this year. So you can see that it's a progression. It doesn't happen overnight. But if you can get them in grade 10, or if your school has grade 9, or if you're talking about club track, you get them early, and then they're having a good time, they're going to continue with the program. So it's just a little idea of what's happening from year to year, and it's kind of interesting, I thought. So I mentioned this just a moment ago. Once you've established the culture, once you get those kids out, the kids want to come back. They have fun. They get excited about track and field. I keep track of my kids from year to year. We have about a 90% retention rate from year to year. So a kid comes out and competes one year, I'm fairly sure they're going to come back the next year. Now, obviously, there's situations where kids don't, but 90% is a pretty high number, and that varies from year to year. Sometimes it's a little bit higher, but it doesn't dip below 90%. So once you've got that established, once the ball is rolling, you don't have to do as much work to get the kids out. And I guess, if you saw those numbers, 145 athletes in the year 2020, for NSSAF, when there's a limit per athlete, per category, per event, you can only have 5 senior boys do long jump, or 5 intermediate girls do, run the 5,000. We're approaching the point where we're actually saying, okay, I think last year we had 17 senior boys who wanted to do long jump, and we only could take 5. So, I guess that's the one drawback. I will mention too is that we don't turn athletes away. We don't make cuts. Athletes will cut themselves by not showing up or skipping practice or whatever the case may be, but we will find a spot for you. I guess it's the last couple years. I think last year there was about 3 kids where we really couldn't find an event for them to do. We gave them some options of either taking their money back or continuing with the team, and maybe somebody gets hurt. But I think we've done a pretty good job of finding a spot for everybody. I'm always looking for younger athletes at track meets from the junior highs, the feeder schools. I'm constantly kind of recruiting during the season. I've got a good relationship. We've got a lot of feeder schools, a lot of different junior highs, from Truro Junior High to Bible Hill to Redcliffe to on Central Colchester, Bass River. There's a lot of schools that feed into CEC. So I try to make contact with the junior high coaches and ask them who their star athletes are, or just who their athletes are, and make myself visible and say hi to some kids that I say, you should be doing track when you get to high school. Hopefully that you will. Our high school coaches are also really good at, a lot of the junior highs don't have 13 coaches. So, if we've got some kids coming from one school, say Bible Hill Junior High, for example, that they don't have a hurdles coach, our hurdles coach maybe will take some of those kids and let them train with CEC. And that's a big deal for a junior high kid to train with a high school team. So, that you're eventually going to get those athletes come into your school. So let them have that experience training with the high school kids early on. We talk about this earlier on in the season before we do our first meet. We make sure that our CEC athletes cheer for the junior highs. The Bible Hill Junior Highs, the Truro Junior Highs. Cheer for those kids. When a kid from Truro Junior High sees CEC is cheering for them, a junior athlete, that goes a long way in for them to think, yeah, I can't wait to get to CEC and compete with this team. So that's something that we talk about, and we really make sure that our athletes are thinking about. And now with the athletes, with the results from year to year being widely available, I spend some time in the fall and in the, I guess, after Christmas, looking at the results from the previous year and making sure I make contact with those athletes that are coming into CEC that should be doing track and field. You know, the kid has done really well. I make sure I make contact. And then the same thing goes with club track. You know, I look through the provincial results at the end of the year. We've done this in the past where we send letters to athletes in the junior highs that say, look, you had a fantastic provincials. Why don't you come out and go with the Truro Lions with us? And Sherry Alexander does that as well. She goes around and actually has little business cards where she approaches athletes at provincials and say, look, if you're interested in coming out and doing some summer track, here's how to get a hold of us. You know, you think you'd fit in well with our program. So it's that constant identification and trying to get kids out, which I think is very important. Okay, so just a couple other factors to consider as we begin to wrap this up. First thing, I talked a bit about budget considerations. You know, I try to make sure my coaches don't have to pay for anything. So where does that money come from? Well, a lot of people I say, well, if you go to CEC, you must have a huge budget. You know, you've got the school giving you money. We don't get almost none from our school. There's no money set aside. Yes, our administration's been amazing. They'll help us out any way that we can, but they don't give us a chunk of money at the start of the year to get going. So we charge $100 an athlete, and that covers everything for the whole season. And our budget per year is somewhere in the range of about $15,000. So that comes, you know, if you have 130 athletes, each paying $100, you know, that's the majority of our budget from year to year. So, and our biggest budget line is our busing, because we have to bus, you know, 100 plus kids to events, and that costs a lot of money. So just be aware that you know, you have to charge some team fees, but the more athletes that you have, the bigger your budget's going to be able to cover things. We don't do a whole lot of fundraising with the team. I found that that was just an added dimension that you know, I did initially, but I was spending so much time trying to, you know, collect raffle tickets or set up this fundraiser or that fundraiser. It was just taking up too much time. So you know, we don't do a whole lot of fundraising. Now and again, we come across a couple good fundraisers, but the majority of our budget comes from team fees. I will mention that we never turn any students away or any athletes away if they can't pay, or if they can't pay right away. We have never once said that you can't be part of the track team because you can't pay the $100 team fees. Or, you know, we've had the kids want to pay if they can. They will, you know, they'll pay $20 in the first month and $20 in the second. So, you know, we'll set up payment plans, but, you know, we never turn anybody away. The facilities is an interesting one. We've been trying to get a proper track built here in Truro for quite a while now. Our 130-year-old track just isn't cutting it. But we obviously have a very successful program without a real facility. So, you know, if you're thinking, how can I build my program and we don't have a track in our town, or we don't have access to a track, it doesn't have to be fancy, right? You know, get creative. Any gym space, you can do all kinds of things in gyms. You know, we run up and down the hallways in the school, you know, trying to, you know, whether it's the sprinters after school, or, you know, I do some javelin stuff in the hallways, which I know sounds crazy. Stairs are a great place to do some work. Get creative, okay? So you don't have to have a top facility to have a top program. Find a space and adapt it to your program and figure out what you need. My advice kind of to any coaches, start small. I've presented quite a bit of information here. I know some of this, as you go through, may seem, oh, this is something that I really like to do, or I'm already doing that. Or maybe you're just beginning and you don't really know where to start. Start small. Keep things manageable. You don't have to do everything from this presentation, from this webinar, next year, right? Find one thing that you like and go with it. Don't try to do too much at once. That's really gonna be overwhelming. So as I said, I've been coaching for quite a bit of time, and I find those best practices that I see from other programs. You know, poach from other programs. See what other teams are doing. Anything that you see that you like on here, by all means grab it, but don't try to do it all at once. It'll just get overwhelming. One of my mentors, Mike McKay, who's now head of Basketball Canada for the women's team, he always said anytime he was going to a presentation or going to a workshop, take away one thing. You're not going to go back and take everything that happened in that presentation. Just find one good thing and go and try to implement it. So if I can help you find one good thing, if you've got one good piece of information from this webinar, hopefully that's something that you can go and implement. If you get 2 or 3, great, but take away one thing, see what you can do with it. Just so you know, I'm always available for help or advice or questions if you're interested in picking my brain. I love the sport of track and field. I love to grow it. I'll help you out in any way I possibly can. Feel free to give me an email, iainlapointe@gmail.com. I'd like to thank Athletics Nova Scotia and Jonathan Doucette for approaching me to do this webinar. Hopefully you've gotten something out of it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you at the track.